making ultimatums to Russia that are first unenforceable, but are provocations and escalations. It's not going to end the war, but it could escalate the war.
Jeffrey has become an apostle of appeasement. Let's tell the people of Ukraine, give up on the Budapest memorandum. We're not going to help you protect your borders. We're just going to turn back on 30 years and give up on international agreements. It's a recipe for further chaos. Jeffrey should know better.
You really think that Ukraine, sir, can drive the Russian army out? By what magic wish is this supposed to take place?
You know, Scott, I've been around the military for a long, long time, and I know that they know what the stakes are in this, they know what the risks are, and they're not about to give up.
President Trump has run out of patience with Vladimir Putin. That much is clear. A 50-day deadline for the Russian dictator to end the war in Ukraine has now been cut to little more than a week. The penalty will be severe tariffs, which the US says will hammer the Russian economy. The problem is that years of sanctions were supposed to do the same thing, and they haven't. Russia's economy is actually growing because of the extraordinary spending on weapons and because oil, once bound for Europe, is selling freely in China and India. That's why former President Medvedev, a close ally of Putin, says that every deadline is a step closer to a far more dangerous situation. Each new ultimatum, he wrote, is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with Trump's own country. So who's going to blink first, Trump or Putin? And what happens if neither of them do, or if they both go to war? I have an expert panel and General Wesley Clark standing by, but we'll begin by digging down on the tariffs and sanctions question with economist and Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Professor Sachs, great to have you back on Uncensored. I know the line isn't great
to be with you.
So let me just ask you, just straightforwardly, if Trump in a few days launches a massive tariff war against Russia, will it have more impact on the Russian economy than the sanctions strategy, which doesn't appear to have worked?
I don't think so. I think that Trump's threats are basically unenforceable. Russia is exporting its energy to Asian countries, especially to China and India. Both have made clear that they will continue to import Russian oil. The U.S. already has demonstrated it does not have clout vis-a-vis China in a trade war. I don't think Trump's threats, therefore, really amount to an end of this war. The problem is that what the Western countries are demanding is not a peace agreement. They're demanding a ceasefire. They're not ready to talk about actually the underlying causes of the conflict. And that's very frustrating because the war could end in a day. It could end in a week if there was more honesty on both sides about what should be done.
I mean, Trump clearly feels disillusioned with Putin because he feels that the tenure of their conversations they've been having bears no relation to what Putin then does. In other words, he says all the right things in the phone calls, but then immediately launches the biggest ever bombardment of Kyiv, for example, after the last call. So Trump now feels he can't trust Putin. But from what you're saying, is that because if you're Putin, you're thinking, well, why do I need to do anything here when it's obvious to Russians that the problem here is the problem they've articulated, the encroachment of NATO onto their border, they have to protect themselves, and so on, the arguments that you've put forward before, and that Putin therefore feels there's not much that America can do about this, short of actually engaging in direct military action, which they're probably betting will never happen.
Yeah, Piers, you're exactly right. But a strange thing happened. In the initial discussions when Trump first came in and he sent Steve Witkoff to Moscow, they talked about real things. They talked about NATO enlargement. They talked about how that had to stop and so on. It looked like they were moving towards peace. Then the neocons all over the place in Europe and in the United States said, no, NATO can't be on the table. You can't talk about these real things. And the discussion from Trump and the Western leaders in general just shifted towards ceasefire and unconditional ceasefire. We're not going to talk about anything other than ceasefire. And Putin said, I don't get it. Well, he didn't, I'm putting words in his mouth or paraphrasing. He said, but we were talking about ending the conflict. Now you're talking about a ceasefire. And the Russians have said repeatedly every day, we want to get to the root causes of this. This is not just a delay for another attack by the West. We know how many people hate us. This is clear. They hate us in Britain. They hate us in France. They hate us in the US. We want to get to the root causes. We don't want just a pause. And the Western leaders never came back to even a moment of basic discussion about NATO, for example. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, concluded the recent NATO summit in The Hague by saying Ukraine is irrevocably going to be a NATO member. Well, duh. You know, how are we going to have a peace if the Western countries are basically saying we're not going to discuss anything other than what we demand? So it's a kind of a conversation of the deaf on both sides. I mean, Trump may be perturbed that he's not getting his way, but maybe he doesn't understand. The first days of discussion between the US and Russia were completely different from what's happening right now. There was real discussion about the real issues of this war. I know that because I spoke with the Russian side, I spoke with the American side. It was actually moving towards a peace. It really was. Then suddenly, because of Starmer, because of Macron, because of Lindsey Graham, because of Dick Blumenthal, because of the CIA, because of everybody, they told Trump, no, 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 you can't say anything about NATO enlargement. And all of that discussion ended. So this is a kind of a dialogue of the deaf, and it's extremely dangerous. Medvedev is absolutely right. Making ultimatums to Russia that are first unenforceable, but are provocations and escalations. Oh my God, it's sad for us. It's sad for us as watching this thing. This is not honest. It's not leading anywhere. It's not going to end the war, but it could escalate the war.
Jeffrey Sachs, a rather ominous way to end that, but I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Well, turning to my panel now. Now, just to be clear, I'm away from my usual studio. I'm in New York, working on a very slight delay. So I begin with a polite request for everyone on today's panel to maybe allow each other to speak and to then respond. That would be a refreshing change to some of the more aggressive shouting matches we have got into recently. Now, General Wesley Clark, the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, is with me. Henry Sadarian, the Russian state TV commentator and politics dean at Moscow University. Scott Horton, the author of Provoked and host of the Scott Horton Show. And the veteran journalist, John Sweeney, who has spent many months reporting from Ukraine, also joins me. So a stellar panel. Let me start with you, General Clark. Welcome back to Uncensored. From a military perspective, where are we with the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think we're at a point where both sides are continuing to fight. Both sides are innovating. Russia continues to throw resources into it. The front line's not moving much. Destruction on both sides in depth has increased. Ukraine's able to strike deep more effectively. Russia's increasing its drone production. So you'd have to say that the war is intensifying.
Professor Jeffrey Sachs was basically saying there was a deal to be done to bring an end to the war, but that at the last minute it all disintegrated because there's no acceptance on the behalf of the West in these negotiations that Russia's ultimate motivation, as he put it, for this war, which was NATO encroachment, was just not being addressed properly. Do you accept that, or do you think that is a spurious defense put up for Putin's larger ambitions?
Well, I think Jeffrey has become an apostle of appeasement. There was no deal to be made unless you say, look, we don't like this war, so let's tell the people of Ukraine, give up on the Budapest Memorandum. We're not going to help you protect your borders. And by the way, the Baltic states, Poland, the rest of you, forget about your membership of NATO. We agree with Russia's root cause. And so we're just going to turn back on 30 years and give up on international agreements. This would unleash a terrible instability in Europe and a global instability as well. It's not a recipe for peace. It's a recipe for further chaos in the international community. Jeffrey should know better.